They seated me next to the bathroom at my parents' 40th anniversary party, right after my sister toasted real family and thanked everyone, except me. So I stood up, pulled out a folder, and read Dad's secret will in front of the entire room. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the daughter they tried to erase, from photos, from memories, and even from the deed to our family lake house. But what they didn't count on was that I kept receipts, legal ones. What would you do if your family rewrote your place in their story? Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Vera had lit one of those seasonal candles again, the kind that made you feel like you were walking through a catalog. I paused at the doorway holding Ellie's hand as she tried not to trip on the welcome mat. Milo was already ahead, scanning the crowded room for a seat that didn't feel like leftovers. "Look who finally made it," Celine called out, her voice light but sharp enough to cut. She held a glass of orange juice, no pulp, just the way Mom liked it. I offered a small wave. "Sorry, we weren't told the time changed." Vera looked up from the head of the table, her smile practiced. "Oh, didn't Celine send the updated group text?" "No," I said, glancing at my phone. "No missed messages, no calls." "It must have slipped through," Celine said, returning to her croissant. The brunch table stretched across the main room, dressed in floral runners, with place cards written in Vera's handwriting. I scanned for hours. Nothing. A folding table had been set near the patio doors, next to the coffee station and just a few steps from the downstairs bathroom. There were 3 chairs, no flowers, no name cards. "Over there," Mom said, motioning with her chin while refilling someone's coffee. Her tone made it sound like she was doing me a favor. Ellie clung to me, her curls still damp from the morning shower. "Is this the kids' table?" she whispered. I forced a smile. "It's our table, sweetie." We sat. I helped them with muffins and fruit while glancing over at the main table. My sisters laughed about something Vera's son had said during his school presentation. I caught pieces of the story, but none of it involved me. "I still remember Dad's face when we showed him the first drafts," Vera said. "He loved that lake house like it was a 3rd child." "Well," Celine added, "at least that one was easier to manage." They laughed. My fork tapped once against the ceramic plate. I didn't join in. A memory tugged quietly at the edge of the moment. Dad and I sitting on the living room floor, rolls of butcher paper spread out, sketching cabins with shared porches and walking trails. I'd used a red crayon to mark out where the garden would go. He'd called it Kaylin's Corner, saying I was the only one who saw past square footage. Now his voice was nowhere in this room. Halfway through brunch, Vera picked up her glass and stood. "Quick update before dessert," she said. "We finalized the sale of the lake house last month. It went fast, cash offer." There were a few gasps, some nods. Someone clapped. My stomach tightened. "That place was getting too much to maintain," she continued. "Better to let it go than let it rot." I smiled like I already knew, like I agreed. Mom sipped her tea without looking in my direction. Her earrings matched her blouse again, navy, gold-rimmed, classic Diane. Ellie whispered, "Will we still go there in the summer?" I squeezed her hand under the table. "No, honey, we won't." Later that night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I sat in the dark with only the glow of my phone. A new email had arrived, forwarded from Julia, my cousin. The subject line read, "Just in case you missed this." No greeting, just an attachment. It was a PDF of the sale contract. The lake house, Dad's pride, was sold, signed, sealed. And there it was, in plain text, Vera's signature, Celine's too, Mom's. No mention of me, no initials, no placeholder, no courtesy copy. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed, then I turned it back on and read it again. The ache behind my eyes settled into something colder. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was edited. deliberate. I thought about calling Mom, about asking why, but the silence in that email felt louder than any answer she could give. Around 4:30 a.m., I began pulling suitcases from the closet. I didn't make a list, didn't tell anyone, just started folding, stacking, packing. Milo woke up to the sound of a zipper. "Where are we going?" he mumbled. "Somewhere quiet," I said, brushing his hair back. Ellie sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Is it far?" "Far enough." I didn't have a plan, not really. Just a key Dad had given me once, pressed into my palm after we'd walked the property line together. He called it a fallback, something to keep for later. It was later now. I loaded the car before sunrise. The air still held a chill. I didn't leave a note, didn't lock the top drawer where I kept family photos. As we drove past Mom Street, I looked once at the house with the polished porch and the perfectly trimmed azaleas. I didn't slow down. I just kept going. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the proof no one ever planned to hear you in the first place. The front steps groaned as I stepped onto the porch, the boards beneath me sagging like they'd finally given up trying to hold anyone. Milo pushed the screen door open with his foot and made a face. "Mom," he said, dragging his duffel bag behind him. "This place smells like wet socks." Ellie stood close, clutching the stuffed rabbit she refused to let go. She looked up at the roof, then back at me. "Is it haunted?" she whispered. I smiled. "Only by stories." The door opened easier than I expected, though the air inside was thick with dust and the sharp scent of mildew. We entered slowly, like guests in someone else's forgotten life. A cobweb brushed against my arm. I didn't flinch. The place wasn't dangerous, just tired. The living room was dim, lit only by slats of light that cut through yellowed curtains. Water-stained wallpaper curled at the edges, and every step on the wooden floor echoed louder than it should have. Milo tossed his bag on what used to be a couch and turned to me. "Where's the TV?" "Not here," I said, crouching to help Ellie untie her sneakers. "But there's a lake and silence." He groaned, but not harshly. He was adjusting. We spent that first morning unpacking what little we had. I wiped down the kitchen counters while Ellie drew suns in the dust on the windows with her finger. Milo tried to rehang a curtain rod standing on a paint-chipped chair that wobbled every time he moved. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And we didn't owe anyone rent or silence. After lunch, while the kids napped under quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, I wandered back into the living room and stood in front of the old fireplace. The bricks were uneven, blackened by decades of soot. I knelt, wiping my hand along the edge. That's when I felt it, a shift beneath the ash, a slight metal clink. I leaned in, careful not to breathe too deeply, and reached behind the central stones. My fingers closed around a cool edge, something square. I tugged gently until it came loose. It was a rusted tin box, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Ash clung to the edges, and the top was dented slightly. I sat cross-legged on the floor, placing the box in front of me. It wasn't locked, just sealed by time. When I lifted the lid, a scent rose that stopped me. Lavender and something older, like pressed flowers. Inside were several envelopes, each marked in my grandmother's looping handwriting. The ink had smudged, but I could still read it. To Kaylin. For when you're ready. My hands trembled. I hadn't heard that name, my middle name, her name for me, in years. I pulled the first letter free. A small, dried violet was clipped to the corner. I remembered watching her press those flowers into books when I was a child. She once told me, "A flower lasts longer when it's loved quietly." The letter began with a birthday wish. My 25th. She talked about the lake house, how it was meant to be my place of peace. "If Diane rewrites the story," she wrote, "you must rewrite your place in it." I reread that line until it blurred. I opened the second letter more carefully. It was thicker. Inside, folded and yellowed, was a scanned page, a copy of my father's original will, not the one that was read after the funeral. This one was older, dated nearly a year before he passed. My breath caught. I, Richard Chen, it began, leave the lakefront property located at, to my daughter, Kaylin Lauren Chen, in full. There was no mention of Vera, no shared ownership, no conditions. I pressed my palm to the page as if that might anchor the moment. The house had been mine, not as a gift, but as recognition. And somehow, that truth had been buried. The floor creaked behind me. Ellie peeked into the room, her curls still rumpled from sleep. "Are you crying?" she asked. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "No, baby, just reading." She patted in and sat beside me. "Is that from Grandma Marigold?" I nodded. "She left me some letters." "Why?" I folded the page gently, maybe because she knew I'd need them. Ellie reached into the box, but I stopped her gently. "Not yet," I said. She didn't argue. Instead, she picked up a pencil from the floor and began sketching more suns into the dust by the hearth. One of them had long rays that touched the edges of the bricks. That night, after the kids had gone to sleep, I returned to the box. I read 3 more letters, each one quiet and precise. She remembered birthdays, hinted at family tension, never accusing, only witnessing. Her words were a mirror I hadn't dared hold up to myself. At the bottom of the stack was one final envelope, unopened and thicker than the rest. I traced its edge with my finger. I didn't open it. Not yet. I slipped it beneath my pillow, the way I used to hide notes when I was a teenager. Secrets feel safest when they rest near dreams. Before I turned off the lamp, I opened the window. The lake was quiet, mist brushing the surface like a second skin. Somewhere out there, truth had waited, and now it had found its way home. The sun filtered through the blinds in slanted gold lines, casting broken light across the hallway. I'd opened the windows that morning to let in the breeze, but it only brought more dust to shift from one corner to another. The house creaked with the kind of quiet that doesn't settle. It lingers, waiting for something to move. I was looking for a screwdriver or maybe a working flashlight, something small. Instead, I found a box. It was tucked behind a stack of brittle magazines and an old roll of holiday wrapping paper in the hallway closet. I pulled it out gently. It was heavier than it looked. The cardboard softened at the edges from years of damp. Inside, a cracked picture frame, some curled papers, and a ceramic mug that had chipped down the middle. I lifted the photo first. It was our family. One of those posed lakeside shots, taken during the 4th of July, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Mom in her blue cardigan, Vera holding a glass of wine, Celine angled just enough to make her smile look perfect. There was even the dog Bixby, tongue out and happy. But where I should have been, far left, standing with one arm around Dad's waist, was a gouge. Not a blur, not a faded spot, a purposeful scratch, deep and deliberate. My outline was faintly visible. The hand on Dad's shoulder still remained, but the face, gone. I didn't breathe for a moment. I just stared. That kind of erasure doesn't happen by accident. Someone took time to do that. They didn't just forget me. They carved me out of the memory like I'd never belonged. I sat down on the floor, frame still in hand, the edge of the photo biting into my palm. And then, like static from a broken speaker, I remembered the funeral. Vera leaning into someone, I didn't see who, and whispering, "She won't even notice." I noticed. I always noticed. In the backyard, Milo was chasing Ellie with a stick he claimed was magical. Their laughter carried through the screen door, grounding me. I slipped the photo back into the box, but not before grabbing a scrap of paper from a nearby drawer. I wrote a sentence, folded it once, slid it behind the frame. They told the world I was broken, so no one would ask who broke me. I placed the box back where I found it, not to hide it, but to mark it. Like a gravestone nobody visited anymore. That afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the window and saw a pale blue pickup roll to a stop by the front gate. An older man stepped out holding a black poster tube in one hand. Mr. Adler. I hadn't seen him since Dad's memorial. He was smaller now, thinner, but the same kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I met him at the door. "You found us." "I had a hunch," he said with a shrug. "Figured the cabin still meant something to someone." He handed me the tube without a word and gestured toward the porch swing. I nodded and we both sat. "I kept this," he said quietly, "even though your mother asked me to throw it out years ago." I unfastened the cap slowly. Inside was a single-rolled blueprint, thicker than a poster but worn at the corners. As I unrolled it across my lap, I saw the lines, the shapes, the cabin layouts, my handwriting in the margins, pencil notes, measurements, little arrows where I'd suggested skylights and shared porches, my initials in 3 corners. I swallowed hard. "This was supposed to be a retreat," I said, almost to myself. "For women starting over. Dad and I spent a whole summer dreaming it up." "I remember," Adler said. "He told me you saw what others couldn't. Said the design came from your heart, not just your hands." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Mom once told me, helping broken people only keeps you broken." I'd never said it out loud, but that sentence had shaped more of my life than I cared to admit. Now, holding that blueprint, I realized something else. They didn't just rewrite the will. They repurposed my ideas, painted them in someone else's palette. "It's still yours," Adler said, "even if they tried to forget it." Before he left, he placed a calloused hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." "You didn't bury it," I said. "That counts." As his truck disappeared down the road, I stood in the doorway a while longer, blueprint pressed to my chest. The sky had turned that warm honey gold, and the wind smelled like sage and warm dirt. I stepped back inside and leaned the blueprint gently against the bookshelf. Later that evening, just as the light dimmed to a soft orange, I found it. A small envelope stuck between the screen door and the wooden frame. A dinosaur sticker sealed the back. It was an invitation. Vera's son was turning 6. The party would be held at the house on Mallory Lane, the same house where I'd once stood with Dad, drawing imaginary lines in the dirt, the house where my voice had first been measured in sketches and silences. I stood holding the envelope for a long time. Behind me, Ellie tugged my shirt. "Mom," she asked, "will there be cake?" I looked down at her hopeful face, not yet tainted by what people could take from you without asking. "I'm sure there will be," I said softly. But I wasn't thinking about frosting. I was thinking about firewood and blueprints, about what gets handed down and what gets hidden, and whether, just maybe, the quietest rooms hold the sharpest truths. I arrived right on time, though it felt like I was already late. Vera's backyard looked like a magazine spread. White chairs in perfect rows, buffet tables under a canopy of string lights, and a 3-tiered cake standing like a centerpiece of good taste and careful planning. The jazz music hummed low from a Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a potted fern. Milo adjusted his shirt collar beside me. Ellie held tight to the gift box she'd decorated herself, a swirl of marker hearts and crooked bows. Vera spotted us almost immediately. Her smile stretched, tight and shiny like a balloon too close to bursting. "Lauren," she sang, stepping forward in heels too high for grass. "So glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice steady. She glanced at the gift. "Oh, that's cute. We've got a little table for things like that." Her eyes flicked to the back corner of the yard. "Your seats are just over there, right next to well, you'll find it." I looked. 2 metal chairs and a folding table sat near the patio doors, right beside the bathroom entrance. Not another soul was seated there. "Perfect," I said, and walked that way with my kids. We settled in. Milo reached under the table and gave my hand a quick squeeze. I looked at him. He didn't say a word, but I knew he understood more than he should have. The party was in full swing. Laughs, champagne glasses raised, people who had known our family for decades clinking silverware against their plates. I recognized the neighbors, the women from Mom's Bible study, Dad's old co-workers. All of them looked just a little too polished, like they knew they might end up in someone's photo album. Then came the toast. Vera stood at the main table, her husband Bryce at her side. Diane, seated like royalty beside a bouquet of hydrangeas, lifted her glass even before Vera spoke. "To real family," Vera began, her voice strong. "The kind that sticks around, the kind that shows up, the kind that contributes when it counts." A polite ripple of laughter passed through the guests. My glass remained on the table. "And," she added, glancing toward our mother, "to the legacy you built, together. Strong women raise strong daughters." More nods, more clinks, a murmur of agreement. When the clapping faded, I stood. The motion was simple. No drama, no raised voice, just the quiet scrape of my chair against the stone patio. "Before the cake," I said, "I'd like to say a few words." I didn't wait for permission. I walked to the front, past the neat rows of guests, past Mom's carefully arranged smile. From my tote bag, I pulled out a slim folder, cream-colored, ordinary. "I know today's about celebration," I began, "but sometimes honoring the past means telling the part that didn't make it into the scrapbook." I opened the folder and held up a single sheet. "This is a letter my grandmother, Marigold, wrote to me. One of several she left in a tin box behind a fireplace that nobody else bothered to clean." I unfolded it. She wrote, "If Diane rewrites the story, you must rewrite your place in it." A hush fell across the garden. In her letter, she reminded me that Dad's lake house wasn't a gift. It was an intention, a safe space for women who needed to start over, a space I helped design. I pulled out the second page, a copy of the will. "This," I said, "is a scanned version of my father's original will, the one before the edits, before the meetings I was never invited to, before I was moved quietly off the list." I paused. He left the house to me, just me. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. Celine looked down at her lap. Vera shifted in her heels, arms crossed. I turned to Diane. "You didn't forget me," I said. "You removed me." Her face remained still, but her hand tightened around her glass. I closed the folder and stepped back. No one clapped. Not one. The silence was full, thicker than any applause could have been. Mr. Adler stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. He gave a subtle nod, one that didn't need a word. As I turned to walk back to our little table, I passed a man I barely knew. One of Dad's cousins, I think. He muttered, "I always knew something didn't add up." I didn't stop walking. Behind me, Diane remained frozen in her seat, her mouth open just slightly, like she'd planned to say something but forgot what it was. Back at our table, Ellie leaned her head against my arm. Milo was looking straight ahead. "Mom," he whispered, "are we staying for cake?" I looked at the tiered confection under the canopy, perfect icing, gold trim. "No," I said. "We have something better at home." As we left the party, I didn't look back, but I knew, without turning, that everything behind me had just shifted. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with truth, firm, rooted, and impossible to decorate over. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished stone. My shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, too loud for how quiet the building felt. I tugged at the sleeves of my dad's old navy blazer. It was a little loose in the shoulders now, but it gave me weight, something to hold on to that wasn't just memory. The fog outside still hadn't lifted. Inside the courtroom, people sat in tidy rows. Most were strangers. A few were not. Vera sat at the table to the left, perfectly still. Her makeup was flawless, too flawless. Bryce sat beside her, jaw set like he was preparing for a bar fight. Diane was behind them both, back straight, purse on her lap, eyes never leaving the floor. My lawyer, Marissa, smiled gently and whispered, "It's a quiet judge. Watch for the questions. They'll come fast if she doubts anything." I nodded. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s with short silver hair and a gavel she didn't need to raise to command the room. Her eyes scanned the benches like a librarian about to ask who dog-eared the pages. Let's begin. Vera's attorney started with charm, as expected. He held up binders and called her a stabilizing force. He said, Miss Marchand invested in the property when others had walked away. She paid for new plumbing, a roof, taxes. She preserved what would have otherwise been lost. Slides flickered on the screen. Kitchen remodels, garden pathways, even an invoice for a new dock. He paused after each photo, letting the room soak in the appearance of effort. When it was Marissa's turn, she stood slowly. No objections to the improvements, she said. We're simply clarifying who had the legal right to approve them. She clicked a remote. A new screen appeared. Contractor invoices with my name, not Vera's. Bank transfers from my account. Emails confirming purchases I'd made under my name. Then she held up the scanned will. This is the original notarized draft, she said, dated 1 year before Mr. Chen's death. He named his daughter Lauren Chen, sole heir to the property. No co-ownership, no contingency. The final will presented posthumously without Lauren's review or signature acknowledgement was altered. The room grew still. Marissa turned to the judge. And we have a brief video for the court's review. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen played grainy footage. It was shaky, probably a porch camera or baby monitor. Vera stood at a kitchen island, clipboard in hand, laughing. She's too dumb to even check the records, she said, tossing her hair. By the time she notices, it'll be too late. In the background, Diane sipped from a mug. She didn't speak, but she nodded. A few gasps scattered from the audience. Then came Mrs. Langley. She walked slowly to the stand, her steps cautious but firm. Her voice cracked at first, but she straightened as she spoke. Richard Chen told me, more than once, that the lake house was for Lauren, she said. He said she was the one who understood it. And did he ever mention co-ownership with his other daughters? Marissa asked. No, Mrs. Langley replied. Just Lauren. He said she needed a place to rebuild. That was the word. Rebuild. The judge looked down at her papers, then back at us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink. The court finds that the original will, though replaced, shows clear intent. In light of documented evidence, the altered filing appears misleading. She paused. Full property transfer to Lauren Chen. Public retraction of the sale claims. Damages awarded for defamation and fraudulent misrepresentation. Vera's jaw clenched. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Bryce muttered something under his breath, and Diane gripped her purse tighter. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Outside, the fog was lifting, slowly. I waited near the steps as people filed past in murmurs and glances. Milo and Ellie were at home, a neighbor watching them. I hadn't wanted them in that room. The doors creaked open again. Diane walked out alone. Her heels clicked until she stopped just short of me. I didn't mean, she began, her voice soft, like she'd forgotten how to be loud. I looked at her, really looked. You meant enough to matter, I said. That's what hurts. She blinked once. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't hear her footsteps behind me. That night, the house felt still in a different way. Not empty, just quiet. Milo was the one to ask. Does this mean we can stay for real now? He said, his voice low as I tucked him in. I brushed the hair from his forehead and nodded. Yes, I whispered. On record. He smiled and turned toward the wall, pulling the blanket up to his chin. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle into the floorboards. Outside, the fog had finally cleared. The house smells like fresh paint and morning toast. I never thought it would. I used to associate it with mildew and broken promises, but somehow, without fanfare, it's become a place that breathes again. Ellie's heart-shaped painting is taped crookedly to the fridge. Milo's shoes sit by the door, one untied, the other already muddy. There's a plaque inside the hallway now, just past the threshold where sunlight hits in the late afternoon. Built on truth, rebuilt with purpose. Mr. Adler helped me hang it, his hands slower these days but steady. Your dad would have liked that line, he said. I think he would have too. The zinnias are blooming out front. Milo planted them in raised beds he helped build with a borrowed hammer and a great deal of focus. They're supposed to mean endurance, he told me, reading from a gardening blog, or memory. Depends on the color. Ellie painted the mailbox, pink hearts, a few stars, and what might be a bird. She told me it was a dove. Like the one from the attic, she said. The ceramic dove sits on the kitchen windowsill now, its once cracked wing mended with a gold seam I applied with shaking hands and a YouTube tutorial. It glints when the sun moves across the sink in the early hours. Some things break so they can be remade with care. This spring, I donated part of the settlement to a local nonprofit. They run transitional housing for women coming out of domestic situations, job loss, or just life's quiet wreckage. The director visited last week. She walked through the house with a clipboard and tears in her eyes. "You really want to use this place for retreats?" she asked. "I want it to give back," I told her. It was supposed to. Once we stood on the porch together, looking at the lake. The water was calm. Everything around us felt held. Last night, the first group arrived. 4 women, each carrying a small suitcase and a large silence. I didn't ask for stories. They didn't offer. That felt right. This morning, one of them, her name's Evelyn, stood by the porch railing while I refilled the pitcher of lemonade. She didn't say much, just looked out at the trees and murmured, "This is the first place I've felt safe in years." I nodded, smiling softly. "That makes 2 of us," I said. Now I sit in the porch swing, restored from rust, oiled and sanded until it hums quietly when it moves. The kids are chasing each other across the lawn. Mrs. Langley is somewhere inside, folding towels or tidying the guest room, humming a hymn I don't recognize. I hear laughter from the living room, and this time, I don't brace. I don't flinch. I smile, and I rise. The floorboards are warm under my feet. Inside, the table still has toast crumbs scattered across it. Ellie's painting is half finished, the water cup tipped slightly but not spilled. The calendar above the counter is already marked with new things. Community meetings, garden co-ops, one date circled twice, art day, porch sketches. The house holds more than memory now. It holds breath. It holds future. And this time, my name is on the deed. There's something quiet and beautiful about a house finally breathing again, especially when your name is the one on the deed. For so long, I thought being erased meant I didn't matter. But what I've learned is this: truth doesn't need permission to live. In every family, there are stories no one wants to face, but that doesn't make them less real. And sometimes, healing isn't loud or perfect. It's planting zinnias, repainting a porch swing, or letting someone else feel safe because you finally do. If this story reminded you of a time you had to reclaim your own place, or speak up when it was hard, I hope you'll share your thoughts. I'd love to know. What made you feel at home again?